Behold, the world has not fallen apart on the heels of the stealth gas damage nerf. Today we're going to talk a lot about the stealth gas damage nerf, exactly what was changed, and we're also going to talk about what it means for the game, whether it's good for the game or not. We're also going to be referencing a discussion that my friend Zelp started on his channel, and if you'd like to go check that out, I'll reference it several times through this video, so it's not your only chance, but it's a suggested video above and it's in the description. We're going to talk a bit about what he said about it too, because I think it's really smart and I want to further it. So we're going to talk about all that stuff, and I'm going to try to break it down for you very step by step. So even if you don't know what I'm talking about, even if you don't know what stealth damage multipliers even are, I'm going to show you that first, then we're going to talk about what it used to be, what it was changed to, etc. We're going to try and be very comprehensive. So again, this video is going to be long, but I'm going to try to make it very informative and teach you exactly what's going on with stealth damage multipliers in 2017 now that they've been nerfed. So let's begin by talking about like what stealth damage multipliers actually are. We're going to spawn in these 5 level 100 heavy gunners. Now these enemies have a lot of health, right? We're going to stealth, and these enemies have a ton of health. I'm going to take out this Redeemer, which is a shotgun melee weapon, and I'm going to shoot them. And you're going to notice that it does pretty high damage, actually. Very high damage. Really, really high damage. I just killed that one in one shot. It's really high. That's a lot of damage to those enemies. Like that's insane. And you could just keep shooting. I could just keep doing that. And this isn't even the best weapon to do that. If I was using the Sarpa, it would do even more damage. There are better weapons for this. It's just an example. The reason it did so much damage is not because I'm like stripping a ton of armor or anything. I have not corrosive projection on my Loki. I have these very normal mods on my Redeemer. It's literally just damage. The reason it's doing so much damage is because of the stealth damage multiplier. So I'm going to do what I just did again. I'm going to show you what I just did again, but I'm not going to stealth this time. I'm going to have to radial disarm them so they don't kill me, obviously. But you're going to see that the damage is going to be paltry, right? Like not very much at all. Look at that. Nothing. Nothing to write home about anyway, right? So the difference, once again, is the stealth damage multiplier. The stealth damage multiplier is a thing that you get when enemies are unaware of your presence, and it adds 8 times damage to melee. So what I mean by unaware of your presence is this can be in a lot of ways. This can mean the enemies saw you, but then they don't see you for a while, so they become unalerted to your presence. This can mean that you're stealthed and they can't see you. This can mean that they're knocked down and cannot respond to you. Zelp made a video where he demonstrated that being knocked down decays the alertness level of enemies. So if an enemy is knocked down for long enough, they'll become unalerted to your presence, and you will start doing stealth damage eventually. Stuff like that. So I hope that makes sense. That is what stealth damage is. That's how it happens. So these enemies were alerted to my presence. They were just chasing me around now, right? And I'm going to shoot that one. You see no stealth damage. But now I'm going to stealth and jump down into their midst. When you have stealth damage multipliers, numbers will appear like crits. Those yellow numbers, those aren't crits. That's indicating the stealth damage multiplier. I know that's really unclear because you could also crit at the same time, but that's what it is. So that's how you see it, that's what it does, and as you can see, I'm doing more damage to these enemies again. But as soon as I unstealth, that damage goes away. So I hope that makes sense. That is what stealth damage multipliers are. Now let me explain what happened previously. If you don't know, or if you just didn't understand it before it got nerfed, previously there was an interesting interaction between damage over time effects and the stealth damage multiplier. And the interaction was as follows. I'm going to show you it with gas and with slash, because those were the 2 things that were important. So if you have a weapon, let me show you what's on this. This is my Atterax. So we got Weeping Wounds, we're going to have good status chance, and we have mostly slash damage, so it's going to be slash procs. So I'm going to hit some enemies with this weapon, unstealthed and then stealthed, and you're going to see that it does way more damage, right? So we're going to attack. Oh, well, I got to disarm them. Now we're going to slash them, and you see the initial hit does very low damage, right? And then they bleed for a bit. And the bleed is higher because slash procs ignore armor. The initial hit is low because they have lots of armor, and this is slash damage. But the bleed proc is relatively high because it ignores armor, and it's scaled off of what the damage would have been if the targets didn't have armor. So that's what that damage is currently. Now, that damage is high, but what you're going to notice is that when I stealth and start, we gotta wait for the enemies to become unaware. So see, now they're unaware, they're not running around, they stopped. Now I'm going to do it again. Now you see the initial hit is much higher and the bleed damage is higher. because I have the stealth damage multiplier. But it's not like outlandishly higher, it's what you would expect, right? Like, it's not tens of thousands of damage, it's just more, you know, okay, it is 10,000 of damage, but you know what I mean, it's 8 times more than it was before. Before this nerf, it was not 8 times that, it was 64 times that, which makes no sense when I present it to you this way. What was happening was, damage over time effects were able to double dip with the stealth damage multiplier. You would get 8 times damage on the initial melee hit, and then when it was converted into a damage over time effect, when you get that proc, it would get 8 times more damage. That damage over time effect would get 8 times more damage than that, which meant that you were getting a 64 times damage multiplier. I'm going to do the same thing I just did. This is a 100% gas weapon. So I'm going to silence these enemies. I'm going to spin into them. You're going to see it'll proc gas every single time. Gas, lots of gas, which is ticking for like kind of a paltry amount of damage, right? It does okay slide attack damage. This weapon has lots of slide attack damage. But the gas proc turns into a toxin proc, and toxin procs don't ignore armor, so as you can see it's like a lot because I procced a lot of gas, but not super high damage. Now I'm going to stealth, and by this point I'm sure you all know what's going to happen. It's going to be 8 times higher. But before this patch, it was not 8 times higher, it was not 64 times higher, it was 8 times higher than that, which is nuts. Like, that obviously should not be happening. But now you can see, when I slash into these guys, it's ticking for a respectable amount. Like, these enemies can be killed now. And you can see that that's because of the stealth damage multiplier. You got those yellow numbers there from the stealth damage multiplier. And as soon as I unstealth, they turn back to white. Now that the stealth damage multiplier has been, I would say fixed. I'm not going to use the word nerf because my personal opinion is it was not nerfed. It was just broken before and they fixed it. So now that it's been fixed, melee weapons just get that 8 times multiplier once, and then the resulting proc, once you get that 8 times multiplier on your melee attack, will deal just 8 times more damage, not 64 times more damage, because that makes no sense. It also makes no sense that that enemy was still moving for like 15 seconds. But yeah, so that's what the fix is, that's what the change is. If you're worried about melee weapons that you were using for the stealth damage multiplier being weak, I hope that what I just showed you assuages your concerns. They're not. They're still really good. Like, it's not, they're not weak now. It's just not overpowered. Like before, we're gonna do this. We're gonna kill it with this Atterax. So we're gonna attack. We're gonna keep slashing. We're gonna do it as fast as possible. You're gonna see these enemies are gonna die real quick. They're gonna die super quick, real quick, right? That was very adequately fast. They died very adequately fast, right? Before, they would have died in like 2 seconds, like 2 seconds. They would have just evaporated, which is like, why? Why is that necessary? And I'm being facetious. I know why some of you think that's necessary, so now we're going to talk about that a little bit. I hope that that makes sense. Just to quickly summarize, the stealth damage multiplier is an 8 times multiplier that gets applied to your melee stuff when you are in a state of unalertedness to enemies, when enemies are not aware of your presence. This can happen through stealth most commonly, but it can also happen just by being sneaky and like running around enemies, or if enemies were alerted to you and then you go away and they're not alerted to you. This previously had what I'm going to call a bug with damage over time effects, where they would get that 8 times multiplier again when the damage over time effect kicked in. That is no longer the case. That's what the nerf was, if you want to call it a nerf. I think it was just a bug that got fixed. That's what it is. I hope that all makes sense, and if it doesn't, please ask me in the comments and I will explain better. But I hope that that makes sense. There we are. So now we're going to move into the part of the discussion where we talk about basically like why this even matters. So it still does very high damage. Those were level 100 enemies. So if you do sorties, if you do Star Chart, if you do Kuva Floods, if you do raids, you'll never fight enemies higher level than that. So it's irrelevant. If that does enough damage to kill those enemies, it should be irrelevant if it got nerfed, but it's still enough to kill them, right? Well, the reason that some people probably don't think so is because of infinite missions. People will do endless runs where they go into like a survival or something, right? And go for like 2 or 3 hours. And the levels keep ramping up. I'm sure most of you know this. In those kinds of scenarios, having that kind of damage made it possible to kill enemies in a relatively recognizable fashion for a long time, because it did such an insane amount of damage. I mean, even if you're fighting level 145 enemies, before this change, you would evaporate them in 1 second with the Twin Basolk, the thing I just showed you. You could spin into them and they would just disappear instantly. So obviously you can go for like a couple of hours and you can still kind of kill the enemies if you have that kind of damage. Whereas now, that's probably not the case. It's not weak, but it's a lot weaker. And there are some enemies that were actually able to take that much damage and survive. Those enemies will now be a lot harder to kill. And there are people who do those runs. There are not very many of them, and I want to stress this. Those of you, if you're watching this video and you like to do that, I'm acknowledging you right now. We're having this discussion partially because of you, but you need to understand that you are in the statistical minority, and the game would never be balanced around that because most people do not do it. You need to accept that. Before we continue with this discussion, I'm not trying to throw you under the bus. The game should still work if you find that fun. It should still function that way. That would be the best possible solution, but it could not be balanced that way. Most people don't do that. And I'm sure most of you who, even if you like doing that, I'm sure most of you know that most people do not do those runs. So I just wanted to get that out of the way. It's very important that we acknowledge that that part of the community exists, but the game would never be balanced around that part of the community. That would not make sense. Instead, what I'm going to suggest is they should just make a proper endgame. For example, rewards for doing that. It's not beneficial to do hour-long runs, 3-hour-long runs. It doesn't gain you anything. It's not worth it unless you find it fun. And if you find it fun, they should make it rewarding. They should find a way to make it rewarding. Now, there are things like the endless relic missions where you get a booster. You get affinity boosters, credit boosters, and stuff as you go for longer. So that's good, but it's not enough of a bonus, right? Like I'm sure most of you agree, it needs to be more of a bonus. If that's the intended endgame, then they need to give us more, right? So Zelb talked a little bit about why he thinks it's a good thing that they got nerfed, and I think it's a good thing too, but for kind of a different reason. I'm gonna paraphrase a metaphor that Zelp used, but you should check out his video. I'll leave a version of his video that has a timestamp to this part of the video if you want to check that out. But basically he gave the metaphor that, like, let's say you were in a foreign country and they have a delicacy and you want to try that delicacy. If you don't like it, it's okay to have the opinion that you don't like it, but you wouldn't go tell them to make you a food that you did like instead, because it's their country, it's their delicacy, right? So the idea behind this metaphor of Zelps is that if the developers want to make a game that is a certain way, it's not really for us to say, well, you shouldn't want to make a game that is that way. I mean, it's their game, you know? And Zelp then qualified this with, I'm sure what you're all thinking after I said that, but they'll make more money, like, we'll like it more. The game is supposed to be tailored to what the audience enjoys, so shouldn't they change it? Well, it's more complicated than that, and this is where I want to pick up on Zelp's discussion. So the reason that I think that that is not the case, why they should not just cater to what the community or part of the community says that they want, is because I think that it is better for the game, and I'm saying that very carefully, and I'm gonna explain why, for the game to be more nuanced, for things to not be trivialized. And what I'm talking about is, like, if we can do that much stealth damage, not this much, but like the insane amount we could do before, then you don't have to care about any other mechanics in like the normal part of the game, right? Because you could just be using an Atterax with a bleed build, and you could just be melting everything. So any difficulty you encounter in the normal parts of the game is essentially artificial, because you could just be using an Atterax or a Twin Basolk or whatever, and then that difficulty would be no more. You would just win. So I think that's bad. I think that creates a less fun game. I don't think that is too outlandish a claim. It is more fun if you have to do something more unique or more interesting to kill the enemies. Being able to evaporate them with a spin attack macro is not necessarily the most interesting thing. If you like doing it, or you are not ready to do it a different way, then obviously you're going to feel like you lost your ability to play that part of the game. But you have to admit that as long as it's accessible to get the ability to do things a different way, that is more fun. That's a better fleshed out game. That's better design, because there are more ways to do it. You can still, now that it's been nerfed, you can still do it that way, but you can also do what I'm doing with the Redeemer, which personally I just find more fun. Like, I like to use the Redeemer in stealth. It's not the best weapon to use in stealth, I just like to. It's what I enjoy, and so that's what I'm using. And now that it's been nerfed, there's actually a reason to do that. Like, I can be away from enemies and do considerable damage. Like, some of my pellets are missing here, right? But like, I can still do like good damage, you know, okay damage. And I can proc other stuff, you know, instead of procking slash or toxin or gas or whatever. And again, if you're using the Sarpa, like, you'll be procking that stuff and do way more damage than this. But again, like, it's not an intense amount more damage, and I like that. Personally, I enjoy that. I also like the Atterax and the Twin Basolk and the Sarpa and etc. But I like that this weapon is now not so much worse that there is no justifiable reason to use it. You know, before, like, this is now probably like a top tier stealth damage weapon alongside those others, but it lacks those procs, and before that made it basically paltry compared to those other weapons. And I just think that's bad. Like, I think it's better to have it be comparable, to have more things be comparable, because then you can viably use more stuff. Anyway, at the risk of going on about the Redeemer for too long, basically what I'm trying to clarify here is that when they balance things out like this, and again, it was broken before, it was not really necessary for the normal parts of the game, they are making the game more diverse, and even if you don't personally like it immediately, you can't deny that it is better game design to have more things be viable, to have more things be balanced, to not have there be a huge power disparity between different types of things. Please don't be upset about this because you like doing endless runs. If you like doing endless runs, you should be upset that they won't give you an actual endgame. That's basically all I have to say about like why it would be a good thing for the game in that sense. But another thing I want to talk about is difficulty and frustration. Let me demonstrate this with the Redeemer, actually. Now, if you don't know, Bullet Dance has a couple of different combos that are very different in like the way that you shoot. So the combo I've been using, you see I'm mostly standing still and just shooting, even though I'm in stealth, but there I just rolled a little bit. So, and they all do good damage, it's not about damage. So if you just button mash, you do this, which is quite cool looking. But it's very difficult to aim. I'm sure lots of you are thinking, are you kidding me? You can't actually hit enemies with that, you're shooting a gun. Yeah, indeed. So if you hold back and button mash, you do this combo, where you mostly stand still and hold the gun mostly level and shoot repeatedly. Now you have to press back, so if you're going to do that combo over and over again, you're going to want to press back to start it, and then forward again, so that you don't like move too much. If you want to do DPS with this weapon, you kind of want to use that combo, and if you're going to use that combo, you don't want to be backing up literally constantly, you want to move forward too. That's good and bad. It's good because there's nuance, there's finesse to using the weapon. You don't want to just use the button mash combo. Most of the time, it's probably better for your DPS to use this kind of dancey back and forth combo that I'm talking about, where you shoot straight. But that's bad because they should have just made a way to do the combo that doesn't force you to back up off a cliff. Well, the reason I'm talking about this is because it's an example of why it's good that it's harder to kill enemies now, basically. And that's because frustration can be very good in a game. Like, it can be very good to have frustration be present. Having there be a learning curve where you're like, oh, I don't like Bullet Dance, what is all this incomprehensible, like, jumping around, like, it's stupid. But then you're like, oh, you could do this, and then it's, oh, and then you can do, you know, this, like, block tapping thing to just shoot. Oh, okay. Like, that should have been better designed, but that moment where you're like, oh, I can do it like that, and then it works, and then I can kill the enemies pretty efficiently, is a good feeling, right? Like, when you figure out, like, oh, this is actually good if you use it this way. Having there be a brief period where things are tricky and you have to figure it out, and then you can figure out and it feels good, is what makes games fun. The problem is if it's like ridiculous to figure out. And that's what I'm kind of saying with like this Redeemer Bullet Dance thing. Like, the fact that the two best ways to shoot this gun are to like alternate moving back and forth in one place, or shoot and then block randomly, and then shoot and block randomly like that. Like, that's absurd. Like, it's obscure and hard to understand, and you would never discover that without having someone tell you. or just like if you play with it an insane amount, you would eventually accidentally do it and be like, whoa, that's a good way to do that. And then you would tell everyone on YouTube, and then everyone would know. You don't want games to be like that. You want them to be designed in a way where challenges are present, but you can understand how to overcome them. And again, that's another reason why stealth gas damage multipliers, stealth bleed damage multipliers were bad. Because it's like, okay, I get that this is doing absurd damage, but like, why? Like, it doesn't even make sense. And there was a whole micro community of people trying to figure out why it was. And then Zelp and a few other people made videos being like, okay, it's because of this. And then everyone was like, oh, that's why. That's kind of clearly a bug. And then they fixed it. So, because everybody started using it. But it's been in the game. It had been in the game for so long. And it was really unclear, and there were people who would just steamroll lots of content. I remember when I was a new player, somebody was like, hey dude, Excalibur is much better if you put gas damage on his Exalted Blade. And I was like, what are you talking about? Why would that be good? And let me show you why it's good. Blind enemies, and then use your Exalted Blade on them, then they'll be in an unalerted state, right? And when they're in that unalerted state, they take stealth damage from your Exalted Blade, which is massive. Like, massive, massive stealth damage. And it's very powerful, and that really is like more powerful overall than doing things a different way. So let's spawn these enemies again. I'm gonna Exalted Blade up and blind them, and now I'm gonna slash at them, and you see there's those crits, but they're not actually crits. That's the stealth damage multiplier, and I'm hitting for damage. Now if I do gas damage, if I put gas damage on this weapon, you would see that I'll get the gas damage multiplier, it'll spread to nearby enemies, and I'll do tons of damage. I'm already doing tons of damage, but you know. So that's something you can do, but that's really unintuitive. And I mean, I'm gonna blame that player. It's, you know, it's their fault for not explaining why it was good, but it's also just obscure. Like, why is it so hard? Why is something so powerful so hard to understand? Like, why didn't they make it more intuitive? That how unclear it was is bad for the game. It's not necessarily bad for you. It's not necessarily bad for the developers. It's not necessarily what you want. It's not necessarily what the developers want. But none of that matters as much as whether it is good for the game. Because if that's true, then a new player coming into the game will think it's good, stay in the game, and the game will continue to exist as a thing that we can all enjoy. That is the most important thing. That's why game design is important. That's why balance is important, etc. And that is why gas damage stealth multipliers did not get nerfed until they got popular. Because if they're unpopular, then it's not unclear to a new player because they won't use them. And it's not confusing to a new player because they won't see other people using them. It's not a game balance problem because no one is using it. It doesn't matter if something is powerful if it's not popular. In fact, it can be good. There are people who have their own little way of doing things, and they can do lots of damage. Nobody really knows why, and it won't be replicated because no one knows why. People will explain what they're doing, and other people will say it's poppycock because they don't understand what's going on, and it won't become a problem in the community. It was, once again, only after people explained to the community in YouTube videos like Zelps and others, people started using gas damage in all of their builds, and there was a period of a few months, the past few months, where there was an insane amount of gas damage stuff. I made gas damage stuff, it was really good. Everyone else made gas damage stuff, and then it got nerfed. Then it got nerfed, after it was very popular. I just wanted to say that as a closing remark, because a lot of people get worried that X, Y, and Z will be nerfed, and I want to say right here, you don't need to wonder whether it will be nerfed. It will be nerfed if a lot of people use it, and it will not be nerfed if a lot of people do not use it. With a few exceptions, because DE, you're a little inconsistent with that, but for the most part, you are consistent with that, and it's clear that that is why you nerf things, and I don't really disagree. That's why you should nerf things. For example, Octavia. Octavia can stealth for a really long time. Unless people get that and start doing it a lot, unless people make builds like my build and lots of other people's Octavia builds that have been going around, that are duration focused, that focus on crouching on those waves and stealthing for a long time, unless people do that a lot, it won't get nerfed. It is very powerful, and it should be nerfed, in my opinion, if people use it a lot. But if they don't, it doesn't matter if people don't use Limbo a lot. Limbo is very powerful after his rework. But if people don't use him a lot, he will not get nerfed. It wouldn't make sense. They want the game to be diverse, so if something is powerful and people still aren't using it, and they nerf it, no one will ever use it, and that's bad. That's not the goal. So, anyway, I think I've gone on about this long enough. Thanks very much for watching, everyone. If you have any closing remarks or comments or responses of any kind, and Zelp, if you made it all the way to the end of here, just let me know any thoughts you have on this. I'm curious to see what people think. I'm curious if other YouTubers end up watching this and have their own thoughts about it. I just think it's important to understand, like, why game design even happens and matters, and like what is going on, like why they nerfed something, why things get nerfed, why things should be nerfed, whether it matters, etc. So that's about it. I'll see you all next time with a more normal and much shorter video.